Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we're going to be diving into the current playoff race in the MLB, where we're coming out of the All-Star break. Obviously, so much was made of it at the time, where teams currently standed, and just sort of looking at the biggest stories coming out of the break, the first of which being that the Houston Astros are officially back. And not to give myself credit or anything, but I was never ready to count out the Astros even when they had the disastrous start that they did. They were 12 games under 500. They were 10 games back of the Mariners for the division, I believe, but they had been putting it together after a hot June and were coming out of the All-Star break with a series against their division rival, the Seattle Mariners, who held the number one spot in that division, and the Astros won 2 out of 3 to jump ahead of them. It was the first time, specifically after that second game that they won on June 20th, they pulled ahead and were first in the AL West for the first time all season. And it has been pretty tremendous to see the way that they have put this all together seemingly pretty quick, where the Astros were still 8 games under 500 headed into June, and since then they have gone 27-15 to not just climb out of a deficit, but they are now at the top of the division. Now, because of yesterday's games, they ended up losing to the Oakland Athletics, so they are currently tied with the Mariners for that number one spot in the AL West. But still, for all of these injuries that they have been putting up with over the course of the year, to see the resilience that they've been able to play with, I know there are a ton of people that are always ready to sort of dance on the grave of the Houston Astros, in large part because of some allegations against them at the end of the 2010s, but you just have to give credit to this organization and the way that they continue to show consistency, resilience, and there's a reason why they are riding this streak of, I want to say it's 7 ALCS appearances in a row. So, you know, the Astros, you have to give them their credit even if you dislike them. Now, on the other side of this series, for the Mariners, was a really rough stretch, not to mention that their star player Julio Rodriguez as well ended up suffering an ankle injury as he was trying to make a play in the field in that third game, and ultimately it sounds like the x-rays are negative and that he is going to be back at some point soon. He's currently being listed as day-to-day, but it was just sort of a slap in the face, along with the fact that they have been massively struggling as of late, where they are 9-17 over their last 26 games. Only during that stretch, only the Chicago White Sox, the worst team in baseball, have a lower OPS. The offense is just not producing enough for them, and they're just kind of having down seasons across the board for a lot of their key players, which to some degree does include Julio Rodriguez. He's still having a good season, you know, kind of hovering closer to league average, though, as opposed to the past couple seasons where he was one of those borderline MVP candidates. He was at least having that sort of consideration, and that's just not the case this year, and they have needed him to be more. Now, again, by no means would I want to put it all on Julio Rodriguez. You look across the line here, they're starting to make moves where they just put Ty France on waivers, considering the fact that, you know, they just need more from especially their first baseman, but slash 223, 312, and 350 so far this season. They are definitely going to be in play at the trade deadline of trying to make some sort of spark moves. Now, replacing first baseman would be, you know, obviously one of the top priorities there. There is a pretty substantial first baseman that is being shopped this trade deadline in Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Now, are the Mariners necessarily the type of franchise and ownership group that you are convinced that they would be willing to go all in on a package that would cost a lot for Vladdy Jr.? I would say probably not. So I definitely don't want to get anybody's hopes up there. But, it would be a pretty fun experiment, I think, to see Vladdy with the rest of these guys in Seattle. It's interesting because the organization hasn't necessarily shown an elite desire to become a World Series contender. Now, they're thinking that, I think they had a quote exactly where they're talking about winning somewhere around 98 games and just trying to be competitive on a year in, year out basis. The way that the MLB currently is with the playoff format, and just in general with baseball, where teams can get hot and just sort of carry it through to a World Series title, a la the Texas Rangers last season. But, ultimately, we know that the Mariners have a very clear strength, being their pitching. They have probably the best starting rotation in the MLB when you look at the combination of guys like Logan Gilbert and George Kirby and Luis Castillo, Bryce Miller. I'd probably throw, probably the worst out of the group, but still a guy that you can feel good about in any sort of a playoff series. And, ultimately, I think that when you look at where this team is at, it's a weird situation, considering the fact that they are still, amongst the top of the AL West. But the way that they've been trending, it's clear that they need something else. They have the worst strikeout rate in baseball, and would they want to potentially look into mortgaging some of that pitching talent in exchange for a hitter? You'd guess probably not, but either way, they're going to need help offensively. So, we'll see how things play out there. Feels like this is the golden opportunity for the Astros to just pull away from the Mariners, but at the same time, Seattle's got to be sitting there thinking that even though the two teams seem to be headed in different trajectories, they still have a great opportunity to pull this away from the Astros if they can get themselves right. But the other biggest change in terms of the playoff race is that third wild card spot in the American League. The Red Sox were really hot going into the All-Star break, and they were holding that final wild card spot when they went into it. But since then, they have fallen apart. And again, the vibes were high for the Red Sox, who were able to knock off the Kansas City Royals in that final series before the break as well, where the Royals are the team that right now they are currently competing with for that spot, and they were able to win 2 out of 3, but since then they have lost 4 straight games. And we just talked about the Mariners and where they currently stand. Whoever doesn't win that AL West is going to be in the conversation for that wild card spot as well. Now, maybe you feel like the Twins could potentially see some amount of drop-off, but it's going to be very contested in both of the leagues for those final wild card spots. And this is not the type of baseball the Red Sox were hoping for coming out of the break. And you have members of the front office already. It's been a contentious couple years with Red Sox fans and their organization, but the fact that you had Breslow at one point about a week or so ago talking about how this Red Sox team has shown that they're worth investing into, and now he just put out a quote saying he's not sure what direction they are really going to buy into yet. I feel like they are going to drop out of this, and that the Royals are going to be able to stay ahead of them, as they are now 11 games over 500. They haven't lost a game yet coming out of the All-Star break. Now, granted, 3 of those wins came against the White Sox, who are like I mentioned, worst team in the MLB. But the Red Sox also just lost last night to the Rockies in a crazy game. So you can only use that level of competition cards so much. But it's going to be an interesting sort of to see how these organizations are going to act, I don't really see the Royals going out and being buyers. I feel like they are probably mostly locked into what they already currently are. The Red Sox have an opportunity to be. They are a bigger market, but it's not something that I really see happening. So, let me know what you think about the bottom of the American League wildcard race there. Quickly here on the National League, it does feel like for the most part that the divisions are kind of going to be wrapped up. The Phillies have been significantly ahead of anybody else in the NL East for the majority of the year. Currently have an 8.5 game lead over the Atlanta Braves, who also have just picked up a couple injuries to Max Fried and Ozzie Albies. So Phillies have to feel good about where they're at. Same with the Dodgers, 8.5 game lead over the San Diego Padres. The Central is where things can get a little bit more contentious, where the Brewers did very much exceed expectations during the first half of the year. And that's a team that, especially when they are, sort of almost ready for, I don't know if redemption is the right word, but they feel like they have been knocking for a while. They see their manager go and get bought out for the richest deal in MLB history when Craig Counsell left for the Cubs, that they feel like they can, kind of, I wouldn't say stick it to Counsell because he was a great manager for them for all those years, but to see him leave, the Cubs struggling, definitely underperforming there, for the Brewers to be able to sort of take off, it is a pretty interesting proposition there. But as for the wild card there as well, you look at the Pittsburgh Pirates, who are off to, again, we're only talking about a sample size of a few games here, but able to steal a series against the Phillies, and especially that first game, the way that they were able to dig it out in the, I think it was the 9th inning. Believe that they walked it off. Like that's just, for an organization that I feel like a lot of America is kind of rooting for to some degree with the Pirates, seeing them get that type of win against the Phillies and following that up as well with a series win. They're now a couple games over 500 and just half a game out of that wild card spot. But you look from the Cardinals, who are in that second wild card spot, to the Arizona Diamondbacks. There are, it looks like, 5 teams within a game and a half of one another. So that's going to be a very contentious race by the end of it, and going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out. But let me know where your predictions lie right now in terms of the expectations for what the postseason will look like. We are going to be switching gears here a little bit to the NBA and giving some final thoughts on the Summer League, which just wrapped up last night with the Miami Heat winning the championship. So stick with us and we will be right back with more coverage on that.